and welcome to the Art of Being Human. We're going to continue with the suicide theme. I thought we would be able to wind down, but I still have a few things I need to discuss with you. I wanted today to get into the grief reactions to suicide. What is the grief like for a person who has lost somebody to suicide? It's not a normal grief, so I just want to run through this. It's a complicated grief. You can get into a complicated grief. You can get into a delayed grief, and or a different kind of grief that's not normal. And we have to be aware that if we have somebody that is suffering because one of their loved ones died by suicide, their grief is much more intense. Their grief is longer. It's hard to handle. And so therefore I want to get into that. This complicated grief reaction includes the following things, because it's not a normal death, and there is a stigma attached for some reason, and I can understand it. There is a stigma attached to a death by suicide. I'm not saying that's fair, but the fact is that there really is. And there's a lot of concealment. People don't want to talk about the fact that a loved one killed themselves. It's a difficult thing to talk about because it makes them look at fault, and they're not at fault. The stigma is unfair in that regard. There's a lot of concealment. Survivors have negative self-concepts because they didn't stop it. Why didn't they stop it? They didn't know it was going to happen. And so they go through a lot of remorse. They go through a lot of guilt. They go through a lot of suffering that most people don't have to go through. I mean, if you have a loved one that died of a sudden heart attack, you wouldn't feel guilty about it. If you had a loved one that died because they had cancer, that's natural death. But you wouldn't feel bad about it in the sense that you were at fault. But somebody who dies by their own hand, somehow that gets reflected upon you as being your fault. It is not your fault. People have to take responsibility for their own lives. It is not somebody else's fault. Like the alcoholic is so willing to say, I wouldn't be an alcoholic if you were better, if you treated me better, if we had a better relationship. That doesn't cut it. People make a decision to do what they do, and they have to be responsible for that decision. Now, of people who are going through the grief because someone has killed themselves, they feel like they've lost a part of themselves. It's like cutting off their arm or something. And I can understand that too, because if you're invested in a person and you're helping them, you have a relationship with them, you're friends with them, even if you're just acquaintances, you are actually a part of their life and they're a part of yours. And suddenly they're gone and you don't know why. And that's really a bad thing. It gets to be a bad thing because you don't want to just be like that. You don't want to have to suffer the consequences of what somebody else has done. And so therefore it gets much too intense. So they don't want to talk about it. They feel like they've lost a part of themselves because somebody's gone and they didn't have to go. It was their decision to go. Now, if you're going to move away, you talk about it. I'm going to move. I've got a new job and I'm going to be moving for that new job or whatever, and that's natural and that's normal, and no one has any blame or any fault to lay in terms of something like that. But suddenly the person is gone because they killed themselves and you were invested in them. Think of what a parent goes through when a child dies that way, or what a child goes through if the parent dies that way. There's a lot of that guilt. What happened? Why didn't I stop it? Why didn't I see it coming? So they've lost a part of themselves because they were identified and attached to the person that died. And so their part of themselves have left with that person who has died. We have to understand that people become attached to other people. They become attached to things, to people, to events. You can become attached, and this is normal. It's very normal for a person to be attached to other people and to other things and philosophies and all of that. That's normal. There are some mentally ill people that cannot attach themselves, and they do have a mental illness if that happens. But the normal person attaches themselves. The parent attaches with the child attaches to the parent. The doctor sometimes attaches to the patients, and the patients to their doctors. The teachers, the coaches, all attach to each other, and that's perfectly normal behavior. But then suddenly the person is gone, and you don't know why, you don't know where, how come, what happened, and you were not informed. You didn't know that was going to happen. So you've lost, in a sense, a part of yourself. As much attachment as you have, as much as you have invested, the more you've invested in a relationship, the more you lose. And the fact is, to be mentally healthy, you have to be able to be vulnerable. And you have to be able to attach. But that makes the grief worse. But if you couldn't attach at all and you couldn't be vulnerable, you wouldn't be able to have friends either. So it's just a part and parcel of being a human being. And in a good, healthy relationship, the person would not kill themselves, but they would get help if they needed it. And so the relationship could continue, and it wouldn't have to be struck down. This way, with a suicide, a relationship is struck down, and that's a bad thing because you can't recover very well from that. So there's a lot of shame, rejection, anger, depression, more than in a normal death. And that's got to be expected. And there's also feelings of abandonment. You left me. You killed yourself. You left me. You're not here anymore. Now, there is a certain amount of feelings of abandonment in the grief anyway. If a husband dies and the wife is left, she feels abandoned. Now, she feels guilty about being abandoned because she knows he couldn't help it. He couldn't help the fact he had cancer. He couldn't help the fact that he had a heart attack. But it's a normal part of the grief reaction that you don't have to feel guilty. It just happens, and you deal with it and move on. But it's nothing to feel guilty about. But think of how intense this would get. Think of how exacting, how exaggerated it would get if the person committed suicide. You left me. You must not have wanted me to begin with. Why would you do that to me? It's a sign of grief in a normal grief, but much more intense in the grief where a person has killed themselves, because it's a fact that if you can say yes to suicide, you can also say no to suicide. So how do you help people that are traumatized by the death of a friend? And how do you help children who are traumatized by the death of a friend? Well, it's hard to do because you're afraid to do it, because you're afraid if you bring it up, it's going to hurt the child or it's going to hurt the adult. But actually, it's more of a help. They want to talk about it. They need to talk about it. They need to express all of the angst that they're going through, and that can help to have somebody bring it up. How are you doing? How are you feeling? And I know that when my brother died, people didn't know what they were supposed to say. And, you know, the usual, I'm sorry for your death, it doesn't really cut it. It's all right, but it doesn't really cut it. The idea of I'm going to be your brother is going to be in a better place now, that doesn't cut it either, because what you really want when you're going through your grief is to have the person back. And you can't have the person back. So just to say, well, they're in heaven, they're all right, it's a help, but not much of a help. What would help is if you said, you know, when you hurt, I hurt. I'm hurting for you. I feel for you. That seems to have more meaning, because you can't intellectualize a death. It's not a time for a lecture. It's not a time for pronouncements. It's not a time to explain what's going on and how you feel and all of that. You know, you don't need an excuse. You don't need rational discussion. You just need somebody to feel with you, to understand and have empathy. What's the difference between empathy and sympathy? In empathy, you are feeling with somebody, for somebody. For sympathy, it's just, oh, I feel sorry for you, pat, pat, pat. You know, like a child skins his knees. Oh, I'm so sorry you skinned your knee, and you put the Band-Aid on, and you pat him on the head, and that's the end of it. Empathy goes a lot deeper than sympathy, where you really do experience the emotions that another person is experiencing. Not exactly, because no two people experience things in exactly the same way, but there is a level at which you can reach where you can feel to a certain degree what another person is going through. That's real empathy, and that's when you can really help. Sometimes the best help is not to say anything at all, just to be there with them. No explanations, no talking, just to be there with them. And then if they want to say something and want to have a conversation, that's fine. You do whatever is helpful to the person who is bereaved. But you don't go at it like a bull moose in a china shop. Well, let me tell you, he's better off, or he would have only suffered if he'd lived, and all of that. They don't need all of that stuff. For one thing, they know that already. What they need is to have somebody understand the level of their grief. And that may mean just understanding and feeling with the person, not being just sympathetic, but feeling with the person at a deeper level, and you share in that grief together. That is the most healing thing you can do. And so you don't talk unless it's called for. And I'm not saying that you have to be silent all the time either, but you don't get into intellectual discussions about it unless the person wants to have that. Then, of course, you accommodate that. So those people who want to help, they are afraid of doing so, but talking about it is something that people usually want to do. So you talk to the level of what they want. They may not want to talk. They may just want to be silent. Then you're silent with them. If they want to talk, and many of them do, then you talk. But you let them lead, and you follow, and you support. That's what you have to do. So if in case of it, that it's a child, you need to find out, what does the child know? The child may be suffering from rumors. Rumors are rampant. He may have rumors. How did he know about what happened to his friend? And how did he find out? And how does he know that it's the truth? And where did he find out? And how did they know the victim? How close was he to the victim that died? You have to be kind of at their level, because their brains aren't mature yet, but they still are capable of feeling grief and loss. So you need to know where they're at. You need to know what they think so that you can kind of guide them through it, because they may be believing things that are not true because they've heard it because somebody else said it, and gossip is rampant, and they may not have the right information. So you have to kind of guide a child through it. You listen, you're empathetic, you don't analyze, you don't judge, you don't give advice. That's not the time for it. But you be with them, you stay with them, you interact with them to the level that they want to have interaction. And if they don't want to, you stay silent. Let the child, especially children, ventilate their feelings of shock, sadness, helplessness, anger, responsibility, all of those things that they have. Sadness because with loss there is grief. That goes along with it. Shock because they may be surprised. They didn't expect that to happen and they don't fully understand what happens. Helplessness because they couldn't do anything about it. And helplessness can sometimes turn into anger. If you feel helpless about something and you can't change it, instead of continuing to feel helpless, sometimes that turns into rage or it turns into depression. There are various things it can turn into, but that's one of the reasons why people who are bereaved can sometimes be so angry. He shouldn't have done this. Why did he do this? And that's a part of any grief, whether it's logical or not. But the people who are suffering from grief can't think in terms of logical things. They may intellectually say, well, I shouldn't think that because it's not his fault, but they're experiencing it. They don't experience logic. There's no logic in terms of grief. It doesn't exist. But people may intellectually realize that what they're thinking is not logical, but they can't avoid what they are feeling. It's just the nature of the game. And so you have to deal with it in that kind of way. Now, funeral parlors should help people connect and support with each other, and I think basically they do that fairly well. It gives closure. Of course, everyone who comes into the funeral parlor, what happened? And you explain it. And you explain it to everybody that comes in. And you're talking about it and talking about it and talking about it. But that is a good thing, because as you're explaining this, you're actually getting a lot of catharsis, and people will ask questions and you continue to talk. And even though you're repeating the story with every person who comes in, it's still a form of closure. It's a form of catharsis. And catharsis means you're just getting something out of your system. You're talking about it, you're releasing it, and that means your grief is less, and your understanding is better, and your emotions are better, because you are actually venting, and that's the way it needs to be. And so funeral parlors do a pretty good job of that. And with children, let them attend the religious services with each other, because they need to have the mutual support of other children their own age as they go through this together. And especially with teenagers, because with teenagers, they need to rely upon other teenagers for support. They do that naturally anyway. And then in terms of grief, this is very helpful for them. Now, I'm going to start going into suicide notes. I don't know as I'll finish with this, but I might. 1/3 of the people write suicide notes where they explain why they did what they did, or they make you think that they are explaining it. And you have real notes and you have fake notes. In terms of a real note, both notes are written by the victims, but in a real note, it shows the impending suicide, and usually it asks for forgiveness, or it gives an explanation. Or there's an incurable illness, or sometimes they accuse people of not treating them right. Sometimes they leave instructions. So I guess there are 4 categories of notes. One, they ask for forgiveness, and they assume that the reader will not understand why they did it. So they're asking for forgiveness. The second would be concerning incurable illnesses. They're not asking for forgiveness, but it's more of an explanation that they couldn't hack the illness anymore and they just wanted to die. And they assume that the reader will understand what's going on. The accusation, there's somewhere there's no forgiveness asked for, and others are blamed for their attempted suicide to begin with. These can be very caustic notes. Well, it's your fault that I'm in the situation, and this kind of thing. And the other, 4th kind, is leaving instructions. I'm doing this. This is what I want you to do. This is how we take care of it. You know, call the police, my body is in the garage. That actually happened. Don't go out in the garage, that's where I'm going to be. Call the police, and they'll find me there. Instructions that they give. So the notes can be a mixture, though, of all of these things. And they can be very short, or they can be longer. There is such a thing as a fake note, when a person writes a note, but they're not intending to kill themselves. They do it to manipulate people, so they make kind of a fake attempt at suicide, but it's not a true attempt, but they're writing a note so that people will do what they want them to do. It's more of a manipulative thing, or to change things, or sometimes they do it for attention as well. So I'm going to start. I'm not going to be able to finish with all of this, but I'm going to read a few of these notes in the time that we have left, so you'll get kind of a flavor of what they are like. Here's one note that was a true note, not a fake note. This is to say goodbye. I have not told you because I did not want you to worry, but I've been feeling bad for 2 years with my heart. I knew that if I went to a doctor, I would lose my job. I think this is the best for all concerned. I am in the car in the garage. Call the police, but please don't come out there. I love you very much. So this was a true note. And it gives an explanation as to why. It gives a statement of the fact that he loves his wife, and then it gives instructions. Call the police. I'm going to be in the garage, but don't come out, because you're just going to see my body if you do. Now, here's a fake note. I'm tired of living, so I decided to end it all. Hope this will not distress anybody. I mean, it almost smells fake. It's so bad. You know, they don't write, people who commit suicide don't write notes. It's going to be better. I'm gone. Bye. Have a good life. I mean, it's much more serious than that. Here's another fake note. I'm sorry to leave you this way, but it looks like the only way out for me. Things have become so uncertain and unbearable that I believe it will be better this way. Have the kids remember me, and don't be grievous because I took this way out. Never forget that I love you with all my heart. Now, it turns out that this sounds like a very true note, but it was fake. The person did not commit suicide. Here's another one. Dear Mother, I just cannot take any more of this for this way out, but this has me down. And he gives his name, which I won't repeat, give everything, that's what he said. I mean, he meant everything, but he gives everything to, and he names another person, my car and whatever I have. It was a true note. I can't take it anymore. I'm giving everything to this other person. So therefore, and the names are mentioned, but of course I won't read them on the air. He gives instructions. Let's see. Darling, it's been great, but I just can't go on for reasons you may know, but I can't explain. There's enough insurance for all of you. Be happy, and all my love always to you and our three. It's fake. For one thing, most people understand that insurance won't pay for a suicide. If a person dies by suicide, it's not like there's going to be any insurance there. The insurance companies will not pay for a suicide. They'll pay for a natural death, but not a suicide. So that would give you a clue that most people understand that. And it's written in most insurance policies. So if they say, well, the insurance will take care of everything, sorry, bye, it doesn't seem like it's very true. Let's see. It's all my fault. I've thought this over 1,000,000 times, and this seems to be the only way I can settle all the trouble I have caused you and others. This is only a sample of how sorry I am. This should cancel all. This turned out to be a true note. There's one note, if I can find it, that's very accusatory. And I want to read it if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Somewhere in this pile is your answers. I couldn't find it. Mom, you should have known what was about to happen after I told you my troubles. Now I will get my rest. Dad, I am in this jam because I trusted people, namely you, and some people trusted me because I am, in my present state, a menace to me and my customers. I think this is the best way out, and out of my insurance. If you ever take a drink, I hope you drown yourself with it. That was the accusation. If you ever take a drink, I hope you drown yourself with it. So it's your fault that I'm doing this because of my situation, and it has to do with your drinking. This is what I surmise. Things are piling too high for me. I love you, but I know our basic difficulties are not soluble. That's what they said. They meant solvable. Please don't think too harshly of me if I take this way out. You have insurance and your health to help get started again. Tell the kids I had an accident so that they won't be ashamed of their daddy. It was a fake note. Here again, the insurance isn't going to cost, it is not going to do anything for an accident. So here is some of it. Some of them are where they explain why. Some of them give instructions. Some of them ask for forgiveness. Some of them express their love of the person and they genuinely think this is the only way out. Other people are writing fake notes because they want to manipulate and they end up by not committing suicide. And it's discovered that they haven't committed suicide. And so you get this range of notes, about a third of the people who actually write them. Most terminally ill people, as I said before, and especially cancer patients, usually do not commit suicide. They usually do not. I talked to you about the lady with the pillow and the pills. that she had in the pillow because she was dying of cancer. She wasn't going to live much longer. And if she wanted to commit suicide in the hospital, she had all those pills in her pillow. But she ended up by not doing it. She died a natural death. Most terminally ill people do not commit suicide. So I'm going to close it here, and we'll be doing something else next time. Please join me then.